Night my daughter introduced me to her fiancé's family. She called me the help. Not in those exact words. She was too smart for that. But when his mother asked who I was, my daughter laughed that little laugh she has, the one that means she's embarrassed, and said, "Oh, that's just my dad. He fixes things. You know, handyman stuff, plumbing, wiring, whatever people need." She waved her hand like she was describing someone who unclogged drains for a living. I stood there, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't asked for, wearing the navy blazer I'd bought at Costco 3 years ago, and I smiled. I didn't say a word. His mother looked at me. Just for a second, something passed across her face, a flicker like a light bulb that almost catches, and then she smiled back and turned to talk to someone else. That was the moment. I didn't know it yet. None of us did. My daughter's name is Elise. She's 31. She got her mother's cheekbones and her grandmother's stubbornness, and, somewhere along the way, she got the idea that where a person stands in the world is measured by what they drive and what neighborhood their zip code puts them in. I don't know exactly when that happened. I think it was gradual, the way erosion is gradual. You don't notice until you look at the cliff and realize half of it is gone. Her fiancé's name is Connor. He's a good-looking kid, works in commercial real estate. His family has money. The old kind, the kind that doesn't talk about itself. His father, Jeffrey, sits on the board of 2 regional hospitals. His mother, Evelyn, was a federal judge for 19 years before she retired. They live in a house in Westport, Connecticut that has a name, not an address. A name. The kind of house that has a placard by the front gate. That's where the dinner was. A Friday in October. Elise had been planning it for 6 weeks. She called me 3 times to discuss what I should wear. The 3rd time she said, "Dad, please just keep it simple. Don't bring up work stuff. It might be confusing." I told her I understood. I did understand. I just didn't understand it the way she meant it. I drove myself. Elise had offered to have Connor pick me up, but I said no. I like to have my own car. Old habit. When you spent enough years never knowing exactly how a situation is going to go, you learn to keep your exit available. The house sat back from the road behind old oak trees. There were 8 cars in the circular drive when I arrived. A Mercedes, 2 BMWs, a Range Rover, and 4 others that probably cost more than the house I grew up in. I parked my 7-year-old F-150 at the far end, next to a hedge where it wouldn't be the first thing anyone saw. A young woman in a white shirt took my jacket. Someone handed me the sparkling water, and then Elise found me before I'd taken 3 steps inside. She looked beautiful. She also looked nervous. Dad. She kissed my cheek. Her perfume was something expensive and unfamiliar. "You look great. Come on." They're all in the sitting room. The sitting room was large and warm. A fire in the fireplace. Books on shelves that went up to the ceiling. The kind of room that feels like it has been lived in for 100 years by people who knew what they were doing. There were about 12 people. Connor's parents, his sister and her husband, 2 aunts, some family friends, a man about my age in a sport coat who turned out to be Jeffrey's college roommate. Connor came right over. He's always been polite to me. I'll give him that. "Sir, glad you could make it." He shook my hand the right way. Firm, brief eye contact. "Thank you for having me," I said. That was when Evelyn appeared. Connor's mother. She was 70 maybe, with white hair cut close and reading glasses pushed up on her head and the bearing of someone who had spent decades sitting at the center of rooms that mattered. She shook my hand and looked at me with attention that most people don't bother with. "And you're Elise's father," she said. "I am. What do you do?" Before I could answer, Elise was there, right there, materialized out of nowhere. "Dad's a handyman," she said. She smiled, light, casual, the way you'd describe a hobby. He's always fixing something for somebody. Electrical, plumbing, you name it. He's been doing it forever. She laughed a little. An invitation for the room to laugh, too. A few people smiled politely. Jeffrey, Connor's father, nodded in the vague way of a man who has just filed something under a category and moved on. Evelyn, though, she did that thing again. That flicker. "Is that right?" she said. Not a question. Just those 3 words, in a tone I couldn't quite read. It keeps me busy, I said. Dinner was at a long table in the dining room. I was seated near the middle, between one of Connor's aunts, a warm woman named Lorraine who taught middle school science and couldn't have cared less about money, and Jeffrey's college roommate, a man named Ted who had retired from orthopedic surgery and now spent his time fishing in Montana and complaining about his knees. Ted and I got along immediately. "You do electrical work?" he asked, when Elise's introduction had made its way around the table as introductions tend to do. "Among other things," I said. "I respect that. I cannot do a single thing with my hands. My wife says I shouldn't even be allowed to change a light bulb unsupervised." He shook his head. "A man who can actually fix something is worth 10 of me." I told him I wasn't sure that was true, but I appreciated it. Across the table, Elise was telling a story about the apartment she and Connor had just put a deposit on, Upper West Side, doorman building, the whole thing. She was animated, happy. She looked like the person she wanted to be. I watched her and felt two things at the same time: pride and something lonelier underneath it, the feeling of realizing that someone you love has quietly stopped seeing you. Halfway through the main course, a beautifully prepared rack of lamb that I suspected had been cater. Jeffrey turned to me. "So," he said. He had a direct manner. Not unkind, but direct. "What part of the business do you focus on? Residential? Commercial?" "Mostly residential," I said, "historically, though I've done commercial projects." "He mostly does odd jobs," Elise said from 2 seats away. She wasn't looking at me. She was cutting her lamb. "Houses, apartments. People call him when something breaks." Jeffrey nodded. He picked up his wine. I kept eating, but then Connor, from the far end of the table, leaned forward slightly. He's curious, that kid. Genuinely curious, which I think is his best quality. "What's the biggest job you ever worked on?" he asked. The table got a little quieter. Not silent, just attentive in the way tables get when a question is actually interesting. "Biggest in terms of scale?" I asked. "Whatever way you want to answer it." I thought about it for a moment. "There was a chain of assisted living facilities," I said. "About 20 years ago, the owner was having serious problems, not just maintenance issues, but structural decisions that were going to cost him everything. Old wiring, HVAC systems that were failing. He'd been patching things instead of replacing them. I came in, looked at the whole picture, and we rebuilt it right." Connor nodded. "How many locations?" "Started with 3. Came 11, eventually." "You managed a project across 11 facilities. I owned the company doing the work," I said. "So yes." The table was definitely quieter now. Elise was looking at me, not with anger, with something more uncomfortable than that, with the expression of someone who has just realized they misread a situation badly and isn't sure yet how badly. "What company?" Connor asked. I told him the name. It had changed since I sold it, been folded into a larger brand. But the original name was still findable if you knew where to look. And that was when Evelyn set down her fork. She looked at me with the full force of her attention. The flicker was gone. In its place was something certain. "Cascade Property Systems," she said. "That's right." The room was quiet. "My husband's hospital group," she said slowly, as if she were working out a calculation. "We contracted with Cascade for facility compliance upgrades back in, it must have been 2003, 2004, 3 hospitals. Major project. Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven," I said. "We finished on schedule. 6 weeks early, actually, on the Hartford building." She stared at me. "You're that Thomas Calloway," she said. I nodded. She looked at her husband. Jeffrey had put his wine glass down. He was looking at me with an expression that had entirely changed from the one he'd worn 20 minutes ago, when I was the man who fixed things when things broke. "You built Cascade from 3 guys and a truck to one of the largest regional facility management companies in New England," Evelyn said. She wasn't asking anymore. "You sold it in what, 2018? 2019, I said. "To the Alderton Group?" "Yes." She shook her head slowly, not in disbelief, in something closer to admiration, or maybe wonder. "We tendered 3 other bids for those hospital projects. I remember because I was on the selection committee. Cascade won because you were the only one who came in and actually walked every building before you quoted. You sent Jeffrey a 40-page report on what he didn't know was wrong. Jeffrey was nodding now. I kept that report, he said, quietly. I referenced it twice since then for other decisions. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't expecting it. You were tired? Evelyn asked. Mostly. I still help people out when they need it. I glanced briefly at Elise. I like to stay useful. The table started talking again, but the quality of the silence before it was different, the kind that stays in the air even after conversation fills the room. Elise didn't say anything for a long time. She ate. She answered questions when Connor's aunt asked them. She smiled when she was supposed to. But she wasn't there, not really. She was somewhere inside herself, doing something difficult. After dessert, when people were moving toward the living room for coffee, she touched my arm. Dad. I stopped. She was struggling. I could see it. Elise's never found apology easy. She didn't get that from her mother. Her mother could apologize before you'd even finished being hurt. Elise holds things close and tight and doesn't open her hands easily. Why didn't you tell me? She finally said. Not accusatory, more like someone asking why the map they've been using was wrong the whole time. Tell you what, that all of it, you never talked about any of that. I thought about how to answer that honestly. You never asked, I said, and I didn't want you to know me differently than you knew me. You knew me as the guy who fixed the sink when it leaked, who drove you to school when your mom was sick, who sat in the folding chair at every single one of your soccer games, even in the rain. I paused. I didn't want those things to change. She looked at me for a long moment. They don't change, she said quietly. I know. Dad. Her voice broke slightly. I know, I said again. And I did know. I said again, and I did know. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I'd known she was going to handle it the way she handled it before we'd even pulled into the driveway. Elise is my daughter. I raised her. I know how she moves through rooms she's afraid don't have space for her. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. It did, standing there while my own daughter made me into something small for the benefit of people she was trying to impress. That landed. It always lands, no matter how still you stand. But hurt isn't the same as broken. I learned that a long time ago. Let me tell you something about how I built that company. Because Elise didn't know any of it. Her mother and I divorced when she was 9. She lived with her mother. I saw her every other weekend, every summer, every holiday I could manage. I was building something during those years. Early mornings, late nights, weekends I should have been resting. And I kept it quiet because I didn't want her to feel like she was competing with a business for my attention. I started with a panel van and a business license and a loan from my father-in-law that I paid back in 14 months. I didn't go to college. I went to trade school, learned electrical, picked up plumbing on the job, and somewhere in my mid-30s I realized that what most facility managers were actually terrible at wasn't maintenance, it was systems thinking. Nobody was looking at the whole building. Everybody was patching the thing that was on fire right now. I looked at whole buildings. I hired people who were better than me at the specific things, and I built the process around them. By the time Elise was in high school, I had 63 employees and contracts with 7 hospital networks and a portfolio of commercial property management agreements that kept us busy through 2 recessions. I drove a used truck. I lived in a house in Glastonbury with 4 bedrooms that I rattled around in alone after the divorce. I didn't buy things to show people what I had. The money went into the business, into good hires, into reserves, and eventually into accounts that I barely touched. When I sold to the Alderton Group in 2019, I was 62 years old. I had worked for 35 years. The number on the wire transfer the morning the deal closed was more than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. I went home, mowed my lawn, and called Elise to tell her I was retired. I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't know how. And I think, if I'm honest, I was afraid of what it would change between us. It changed things anyway, just differently than I expected. Jeffrey found me near the fireplace before the evening ended. He's not a warm man by nature. You could see that. But he has the quality of someone who recalibrates quickly when the data changes. He held out his hand. I owe you a different introduction than the one this evening started with, he said. No, you don't, I said. You were working with what you had. That's generous. He shook my hand. Cascade did good work for us. I mean that sincerely. You have a good eye. I had good people. That's the same thing at a certain level. We stood for a moment looking at the fire. My daughter loves your son, I said. I can see why. He's a good man. Jeffrey nodded. She's remarkable, he said. Whatever you did right, you did a lot of it. That one I wasn't expecting. It hit me somewhere in the chest and I had to take a breath before I answered. Thank you, I said. That means more than the rest of it. He understood what I meant. I could tell. Evelyn stopped me at the door as I was leaving. She was holding 2 cups of coffee and offered me one. I took it, even though I'd been trying to cut back on caffeine after 7. Can I ask you something personal? She said. Sure. Why the act? The handyman thing. I looked at my coffee. It's not entirely an act. I still do it. People in my neighborhood, older folks mostly, they need help, and I like being the one who shows up. But you let Elise describe you that way. I let Elise describe me the way she needed to. Evelyn studied me for a moment with those judge's eyes of hers. That's either very generous, she said, or very sad. It might be both, I admitted. She was quiet for a moment. Then, she'll figure it out. The good ones always do. I know, I said. She's a good one. Outside, the October air was cold and clean. The oaks were still lit from the floodlights on the house. I found my truck at the end of the drive where I'd left it, next to the hedge. I sat in it for a minute before I started the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from Elise. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry. Can we talk tomorrow? I sat with it for a while. Then I wrote back, I love you too. Call me whenever you're ready. I started the truck. The engine turned over on the first try, the way it always does. I've kept it well maintained. I keep everything I care about well maintained. That's not a handyman habit. That's just who I am. I pulled out past the big oaks and onto the dark road, and I let myself feel, for just a moment, all of the things I'd held still during that dinner. The sting of it, the loneliness of it, and underneath all of that, like a floor you trust, even when you can't see it clearly, the knowledge that my daughter had called me the next morning, that she would, that she already knew she needed to. A man can be underestimated by his own child and still know his own worth. Those two things can be true at the same time. It took me a long time to understand that, but I understand it now. And on a cold Friday night in October, driving home from a house with a name on the gate, that was enough. I've been thinking about that October night more than I expected to. Not the part where Evelyn said my name across the dinner table, not the silence that followed, not even Jeffrey's handshake at the end of the evening, which meant more than he probably knew. What I keep coming back to is the moment, right before all of that, standing there with a glass of sparkling water I didn't ask for, listening to my own daughter describe me like I was someone she'd hired to fix a leaky faucet. That moment is the one that stays. I don't tell this story to make Elise look bad. I tell it because I think there's something in it worth sitting with, something about what we teach without meaning to, and what we learn without meaning to, and how those two things eventually find each other. Here's what I believe. The way things turn out is almost never accidental. Elise didn't wake up one day and decide to be ashamed of me. She built that slowly. The way you build anything. One small decision at a time. One room she walked into and felt like she needed to be more than she was. One introduction where she chose the version of me that made her feel safer. I let it happen because I thought staying quiet was a kindness. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also a mistake. Those two things can both be true. What I know is this: the truth has weight. You can carry it quietly for a long time, but you cannot make it weightless. Eventually it sits down at the table with you whether you invited it or not. I built a company over 35 years by doing one thing consistently. I looked at the whole building. Not just the thing that was smoking, not just the crack in the wall someone had painted over. The whole structure, top to bottom, honest about what was there. That habit didn't come from talent. It came from a decision I made early on that I would rather know a hard truth than be comfortable with a soft lie. That decision is what I'm most proud of, not the sale. Not the contract with Jeffrey's hospital group. Not any of it. The decision to see clearly and keep going anyway. That's the thing. I think about what I want for Elise, and it comes down to three things. I want her to be good, not just polished or successful, but genuinely, privately good. The kind of good that holds when nobody's watching. I want her to think clearly, to ask better questions than the ones her fear is asking her. And I want her to be strong enough to keep showing up, even when the room doesn't arrange itself the way she needed it to. Those things can't be given. They can only be built, the way a building is built, slowly, with the right materials, by someone willing to see what's actually there. She called me the next morning. We talked for almost 2 hours. She cried. I didn't, but I wanted to. At the end of the call, she said, I think I've been afraid of not being enough for a really long time. I said, I know. Me too. And that was the most honest thing either of us had said to each other in years. We're still finding our way back to each other. It's slow. It doesn't look like a resolution. It looks like two people calling each other on Sunday afternoons and figuring it out one conversation at a time. That's enough. That's actually more than enough.